Hi, everyone. Welcome to the weekly roundup container, um, hosted and produced by members of the pot. Thank you for tuning in to the Broom Radio podcast. This is the April 24th container of this particular container roundup. So I just want to say thank you all for joining this town hall esque um, podcast episode. And I'm here. This is me, Hoda High, Intrepid Bodies, here with other members of the pot, tenders and gardeners alike. And yeah, y'all want to hop on and say anything?
Thank you for the intro. Hi, everybody. This is Anna. Thank you for tuning in. I always have kind of like thought about this. I'm like, should we introduce ourselves at the beginning of each roundup? So I'm kind of happy that like you set it up like that, Hoda. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Else who's on the mic? It feels like a rap cipher,
Yeah, totally.
That made me want to say ad rock, but I've never gone by ad rock. But thinking of the Beastie Boys. But this is Adam, and I go by Adam Archetype in the server.
Hey, Adam. Oh my God, the ad-libbing happening in the chat right now.
Yeah,
so...
Dobo, you should start spitting, man.
I will say that one of the beauties about being in the Broom Discord is that you're exposed to the live chat. And so if you're interested in, especially if you're listening to this asynchronously, if you're interested in joining the Broom Discord, there is a link at the bottom of this episode for you to join and to laugh or to understand what we're laughing about on these recordings when we just take a moment to giggle, because I know you know it's precious. So anyway. I would like to, just hold space and see if there is anything in particular you guys want to front load in today's conversation to give folks an idea of what has been happening in the Broom, both in the conversational streets or in the back of house organizing of the Broom, keeping the Broom fun and juicy conversational wise. But I'm going to take a step back and if there's anything anyone wants to say.
What's up, y'all? This is Nobu. I accidentally deafened myself on the Discord server, so I missed the last 30 seconds, but I'm going to go back to mute and catch up.
Well, I'll say the most exciting thing for me in terms of back of house is that we are rolling out a buy me a coffee situation, which for those of you who don't know, it means that we're starting to how do I even describe this? Basically, we're making it so that you can pay us and you can support the work that we're doing here, not just with your time and energy, but also with your money. And that's really exciting to me personally, because I think that the work that takes place in the Broom is valuable. And yeah, I think it deserves to be compensated. What does value mean? Nobu asks in the chat. Value means that it takes time and energy to sustain the Broom. And there's a lot of work that gets done in order to do that. I don't know if that really answers the question, but that's what came through for me.
I guess I would be curious to hear. Well, I want to hear like how y'all define work, but I feel like there's also a lot of work which isn't valuable, like in like I want to say like current time or like
Yeah.
a consensus matrix of reality. So I guess I'll start by asking y'all like, what do you find valuable, not just in the broom, but like in general?
That's a great question. The first thing that came to mind for me was presence as like a currency.
Oh, well, I really like that. Um, what about like food and water?
Yeah. That's all
um,
right too, I guess. I mean, I need it. I need it to survive, you know?
totally. And I really like that frame as well because I feel like I need presence to survive.
Me too. Me too.
I want someone to like be like, well, do you need presence to survive? Like, are people who are in solitary confinement not suffering from a lack of presence, and do they not also continue to survive? That's Nobu 2, and I'm Nobu 1.
To enter the chat.
And
Welcome.
like if Nobu 2 was like, well, what about people in solitary confinement? Like, no one's listening to them and they survive, right? Then Nobu 1 would be like, well, there's a reason why solitary confinement is a form of punishment, right? And it's
Yeah.
also a form of punishment that many, I would say, enlightened nations, well, not necessarily, but like many, I would say, like many penal systems, which are part of um, systems of like law and order and rehabilitation, have started to outlaw solitary confinement, if I'm not mistaken, because it's
Mhm.
being seen as a form of torture.
Yeah.
I think it's starting to be seen as a form of punishment, which doesn't improve health or the behavior of prisoners.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, while I feel like most people don't live in a state of solitary confinement, I feel like it does illustrate the value of presence.
Absolutely. I feel like whenever I like try and kind of like explain to people like the way that presence is effective and like how deeply it affects us, I feel like that's kind of like the most pertinent example that comes to mind for me.
Take that, Nobu, too.
And just like, yeah, also just to like illustrate how powerful human connection can be, you know?
Mm. Yeah, I feel, and we've had like conversations about the nature of social media. Well, I remember having conversations about the nature of social media.
Hmm.
Not maybe if people who are listening now, haven't listened to it, you can go back into the archives of the Broom Radio podcast and check out. I think it's an episode of Roundup called Social Media, right?
Mhm.
Parasocial media.
Or it's called Parasocial Media. That's great.
I think it's like parasocial media and the void of the internet.
Oh wow, that's dramatic. But I feel like, not only do we talk about um, how much or how little people end up feeling listened to on social media, but I feel like we also talk about like why people turn towards social media, which I feel like is often because they're not feeling listened to, um, like off the internet,
Right.
or they're not feeling listened to in other places on the internet.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, again, like while it's not exactly solitary confinement, I do feel like there are aspects of solitary confinement and aspects of the outcomes of solitary confinement, like mental illness, for instance, which tend to arise for people who may feel like they're actually like cohabiting with people or co-located with people due to the fact that there is a lack of presence
Right.
and a lack of being listened to.
Totally.
And then, you know, I feel like a lot of the research that people like Jonathan Haidt are doing, that's HAIDT, not as in HATE. But a lot of the research that they're doing on the effects of social media talk about the fact that people don't feel reflected accurately on social media. But then they also are starting to talk about how, because so many people are on social media, there's actually also a lack of, I would say, like presence, again, like off of social media.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, that's a, if you're interested in checking out that work, it's Jonathan, normal spelling, Haidt, Haidt, and he has a Substack called After Babel, which I feel like is sort of, I would say, like almost like the research notes that are going into like his long form published work. Shout out to that work. I think it's quite controversial. I think there are many financially incentivized organizations trying to um, poke holes in his research and his findings.
Mm.
But I feel like even without that research, I would guess like most people can feel, um, yeah, like a sort of vacuum of presence occurring.
Yeah. I
Um,
mean, I'm just thinking about how, like, at any given moment, like when you're, I don't know, just like out and about and you're like just looking
mhm,
around in a crowded place, it's like everybody's looking at their phone. You know,
mhm,
that's just that's a norm.
mhm. Yeah, I remember when Black Mirror first came out. I think they were starting to like make that point in a pretty exaggerated way, but now it doesn't feel
Yeah.
exaggerated.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy? It's like, yeah.
And then I also feel like when Black Mirror first came out, people weren't like, I mean, like some people were probably like, oh, like it's exaggerated, like that's not happening, that's not really gonna happen. But I feel like at least like 85% plus of the people who were watching it were like, oh yeah, like this is totally on point. You know, like
Yeah.
this is what's happening.
Yeah. And I feel like we've had a lot of good conversations about like what social media does to like one's awareness, like what being on social media, like the sort of effects that it can have like on attention, or just like,
Mm.
yeah, I think what I the conversation that I'm remembering was an attending call, I think a couple weeks ago,
Hmm.
um where I was just like kind of describing how like when I'm on my phone and I'm like kind of like switching between apps, how I'll just like forget what I was thinking about randomly. Like there'll just be like these vacuums in my like awareness, like
Mm.
where I just like forget where I am and like what's going on. uh,
Yeah.
so yeah, it's really interesting to me.
Yeah, I remember in that conversation, I was also, even like, I'd say if you're just in one app, I feel like there's this effect. And, you know, like I had the benefit, you could say the benefit mostly of living in New York. And like, you know, like sometimes you're on a train and like two trains pass in opposite directions, but you can sort of see through your windows into the windows of the other train, right?
Uh huh.
And I was kind of thinking about and talking about how like scrolling down, let's say Instagram in particular, because it's most like that because it's pictorial,
Hmm.
is like sort of seeing the people in the other train go past you really quickly.
Totally.
And it's like every one of those glimpses has the opportunity to sort of like fragment and take away some of your awareness. And then I would say, like, you know,
Can I ask
I'll
you?
say,
Can I
go on,
pause you for a second?
sure.
I was just curious because I feel like I know what you mean when you say it can fragment your awareness, but maybe other people might not understand that. Would you
Oh
mind
yeah,
explaining?
I'll say that, like, for me, like, my metaphysical body is composed of like the space and the time of every moment that I occupy, and then also like, you know, every moment of space and time perceives something of space and time, right?
Mhm.
So like I'm sitting in a location in a particular moment, like right now it's 10:38 in the morning in Perth,
Yeah.
Australia. And that's the moment that my body is in right now, and it's taking up all this space of my body on my bed, to be like perfectly honest with you.
Mhm.
And then I'm perceiving a bunch of space in this moment. And then I would say, like, if I'm just scrolling through Instagram and I would say, like, I'm not well shielded, then I'm projecting my awareness into the space and time of like whatever I'm scrolling past. And then as it like goes out of my screen, then I'm projecting my space and time, my awareness into like another snapshot of someone else's experience. And then
Mhm.
that keeps on happening. Does that make sense?
I think
So,
so. Yeah, I think
so
so.
like instead of my awareness being sort of like continually here as it is now, and I am well shielded, I would say like my space and time right now and the awareness of my space and time right now is constantly like in my body, on my bed in Perth, Australia, looking at a phone, and
Mhm.
sounds and pictures are coming through my phone, and there's like a continuity there.
Yeah.
And I would say, like, even if I was jumping between app windows or scrolling in Instagram, let's say, or TikTok, which I think is even more evocative, I
Mhm.
would say that, like, there's a firm anchoring of my awareness, not like, you know, in Hong Kong and then in New York and then in other parts of China and then like in Africa and then like looking at dolphins and then looking at what's happening in the Levant, but always like my body here sitting on a bed in Perth, Australia,
Yeah.
seeing these images as snapshots of things which are happening in other parts of the world
Yeah.
in other times, right? But
Yeah.
I would say if we're like not well shielded and we're not well grounded, then our awareness starts to like disappear into those windows.
Mm.
And I would say that like a lot of the content that we see on Instagram and TikTok and maybe some on Twitter, I'd say Twitter is like much lower fidelity, but it can be very triggering and can literally, well, not literally, I'd say like within the framework that we often use when we're talking about these things in the broom and elsewhere within spiritual circles online and in real life, it disembodies us, right? Like
Yeah.
our body has like a feeling of discomfort or dysregulation associated with the imagery or the video or the sound that we're partaking in.
Mhm.
And then instead of being firmly anchored where I am on my bed in Perth, Australia, that part of my awareness becomes, quote, fragmented, unquote, and ends up, I would say, quote, belonging, unquote, to the space and time of whatever dysregulated me.
Mm. Yeah. Thank you so much for breaking that down.
Thanks for asking.
Yeah.
Um, so then, yeah, I mean, I feel like what you're talking about with regard to sort of, you know, experiencing like what some people might call like, quote, mind wipe, unquote, or
Mhm. Mhm.
you know, an inability to string together their memories. It feels very real to me.
Right.
And there's very little like connective tissue when it comes to like the different things that we're seeing, right? Like one of the things which I've been meditating on recently is like, yes, when you're in the broom, you can talk about a lot of different things, but I would say like we do a pretty good job of organizing things via topical descriptions, right? So we have a thread right now called An Intro to Vedic Metaphysics. And we have a thread right now called Aniyaban something. It's like a long name which comes from the subcontinent of Asia, which is difficult for me to remember, I'll be very honest. We have like a thread called The Roots of Christian Mysticism. We have like a channel called Jewishness. We have a channel called Islamicacy. Um, and I feel like, of course, like we allow those conversations to go where we feel like we need them to go in order for people to share what is on their hearts, I'll say. Um, I feel like you might have lost me just then because my
Yeah,
Wi-Fi connection dropped.
yeah, I thought it was me for a second. But the last thing I heard you say was people wander, like people like
Oh yeah.
space is held for people to share what's on their hearts.
Okay, yeah, and then Wi-Fi dropped out.
Yeah.
And yeah, what I was saying is like, but there is more continuity there, I would say in general, than there is like if people are scrolling their timeline on Instagram or TikTok or Twitter or even Mastodon, which a lot of people consider to be like a safer social network nowadays, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like if people want to come back to something, or if something comes up in their awareness that they want to share, then there is like kind of a framework of continuity which people can dip into and share things there.
Right.
And to go back to the subject of work, I would say it feels like work a lot of the time to maintain that state of continuity because
Mm,
people, I would say, like, because partially of parasocial media, I think people's attention spans can be more like wavering and divergent. And
yeah.
sometimes we do need to be like, hey, would you like to create another thread for that? Because we're going a little bit too far off topic. And sometimes we have to be like, oh, like, this is really interesting. I'd love to see this in a thread that we already have
Right.
relating to, I don't know, menstrual care, right?
hmm
Um, and I think like another function of that is that I'll say for me, and like for what I've said most recently about the Broom sort of like becoming a bit of a publishing house, which is a grandiose term, I would say. But it does make it easier, let's say, if we want to like go back and summarize the conversations that we've had on a particular topic. You just have to wade through all of the gifs. Maybe. Or maybe some of the gifs are relevant. But you know what I mean? Like I think that kind
Yeah.
of continuity can be like a little bit of like, I'll say like quote safe haven unquote on the internet for people,
Yeah.
compared to, yeah, like relatively fragmented, I would say, spaces
Yeah.
which most commonly exist for people online.
hmm
Um, but I also feel like synchronous containers like this can be really helpful because I'd say it's like less likely that people's attention fragments and diverts when people are talking and holding a fairly continuous conversation, right?
hmm
Which I also think is quite challenging for a lot of people who
I
are
was gonna
sort of,
say, you'd hope.
yeah, I mean, I feel like honestly, I feel like people are like a little less receptive to long form continuous conversations because of I would say like the smorgasbord which is available when it comes to parasocial media
Yeah.
and the contents of that smorgasbord, which I think like, if your nervous system has acquired a taste for dysregulation, then it's like, what is this like continuous conversation where people are like listening to each other? Like, it's
Yeah.
like becoming like intolerant to gluten or dairy or something. It's like,
You might get annoyed. You might be like, "Okay, but get to the point. Get to the point.
right,
Where's my next"
right.
No, let me not be so dramatic about it, but I do feel like can like produce this like urgency of like needing to like I don't know, I just get like I sometimes I do wish I could be on video because the way I'm moving my body right now probably translates what I'm trying to say better than I could with words, but it's like I'm just
Mm,
like jerking my body back and forth, you know? Like it's just like
mhm.
that's
Yeah,
how
it's like
yeah.
what's with the vegetables? Like, I want it to be trick or treat every day type of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Because there are so many options.
Hmm.
Like I'm bored. Okay, well I'm just gonna keep scrolling until I'm not bored anymore.
Hmm. Yeah, isn't that weird that like the body can kind of like acclimate and even crave things which on some level are I'll say like, referring back to the work of Jonathan Haidt, like, yeah, like I think there's a lot of evidence like in the literature and also I would say like in our bodies that tells us that it's kind of unhealthy to consume media that way, except
Yeah,
our body can still develop a craving for it. It's quite strange, isn't it?
I guess when you put it like that.
It's like I feel more depressed and the miracle of reality is somewhat underwhelming. But I guess like let's go back to the feeding trough.
Well, that's just yeah, I mean, like, you basically just described addiction, right?
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
to me, anyway.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it. Um, I'm kind of, I'm very tempted to like go off on a tangent and ask y'all like why you think like um the bodies form addictive tendencies, but I feel like it might be a bit of a distraction. But I'm kind of curious how y'all feel about that. I'm just gonna check the chat and shut up.
What was coming up for me was, like, I feel like someone listening to this conversation I'm just, like, putting myself in the shoes of somebody listening to to this conversation and being like and, like, maybe this is obvious. It probably is, but I'll ask anyway. But it's like, well, what's the problem with, like, becoming addicted to the internet? Aren't we all just gonna, like, be using AI, like, in the future? Like, doesn't it just not really matter? Like, why care, you know?
That's a great question. You've completely changed my mind. I'm just gonna go upload myself into the cloud now. I want to hold space to see if anybody has anything else to say about this. Otter says the singularity is already happening, bro.
What what I don't understand that, Jose, what do you mean?
I mean, it's a difficult. I think it's somewhat of a difficult question for a lot of people to answer. And I'd say, like for me, it's kind of difficult because there's like so many reasons I want to, I want to put into a linearized articulation in response to what you said, right? So my mind is like, like which of these eight things do I say first? And like, does eight connect better to seven, or does seven connect better to eight? It's like, how do I order this? But
Sense, yeah.
I'll say that like this morning in my time, I guess like earlier this evening for people in the Americas, like I channeled a light language transmission, which is a little bit of a gear shift conversationally because we haven't talked about light language for quite some time. But the transmission was called T307 because it's the 307th transmission of T, which I've held space for. And I would also say, like, to be fair, like Hoda also made offerings to that container, and I'd say yesterday, I think Anna, you made offerings to T306. But the topic which I channeled for that discussion was like, quote, what flowers bloom and what fruit will grow in the compost that's made of silicone, and unquote. And I feel like the basis of my answer would be like related to that topic. And y'all might not remember the question because I've been waffling for quite a while now. But I guess the question is like, what's so wrong? I'll summarize the question from my
Yeah.
understanding, which is like, what would be so wrong about like giving all of our attention to the internet?
Yes.
And I would say that we're not giving awareness to our bodies most of the time, and we're not giving awareness to the physical processes that sustain our bodies. And I would say like the bodies that we are giving our awareness to, which are mostly like devices and data centers, we don't really know what their life cycle looks like.
Ooh.
Right? Like there's no like proof that they actually help us to give awareness back to our bodies metaphysically.
Wow.
In fact, I feel like there's a lot of proof that they kind of stop us from doing that. Again, referring to the work of Jonathan Haidt, but also like I'd say like everybody's individual experience, right? Like,
yeah.
Some people watch things online about like physical exercise and cooking food, and that can be useful. But I'd say like a lot of people either watch that stuff and they don't remember it, or a lot of people don't watch that stuff at all. And a lot of people end up spending more and more time online, I'll say like nourishing their head mind addiction to knowledge. And, I'd say less and less time offline nourishing their connection to Earth. I'd say like even a lot of the content online about exercise and making food is sort of like, here's how you can, 7-minute abs, no, 6-minute abs, no, 5-minute abs, right? It's like, or like, here's how you can like meal plan so that you can make cramming food into your body as efficient as possible. And the unspoken part is basically so you can spend more time online, or like so you can spend more time online working for a company, which is also producing apps which are trying to get people to spend more time online. Right?
Yeah.
So like there's this like gradual / not so gradual migration away from Earth towards like the bodies of like data centers and devices and silicon and lithium. And I don't think too many people are thinking about like, okay, so like we're taking all this stuff out of the Earth to make these devices.
Right.
How do we like put it back in? Like, what was it doing in Earth? Like, is it possible that it was like part of some kind of vital function that we haven't like figured out yet?
Oh my god.
How do we like take apart these machines and like either reuse them or give them back to the Earth in case there was some kind of vital function to where those things were in Earth before? Where are we putting like the detritus of these machines? Like,
Yeah, like where does it all go?
is it good for our bodies? Like,
Where does it go?
what happens when all this stuff like leaches into our water supplies, all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess it became like a very long answer to your question.
No, thank you. I appreciated it.
Let me check the chat. But it says give lithium the mic. I mean, give Congo the mic. Do you want to say more about that? I'm actually not so aware of what's happening with regard to lithium in Congo. Whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know if lithium in particular is connected, but I do know that the source of the batteries of most of the iPhones that we are using right now are sourced from the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of interesting debate happening right now where people are really excited about the iPhone 15, but there's also now this like added knowledge where people are aware of where these parts of the iPhone 15 are coming from. So I, unlike, you know, my bubble of social media, people make a push to suggest to other people to like opt for like refurbished phones, asking other family members if they have like an extra phone that they're not using, just as to kind of like slow down the funneling of money towards that. Like, I would just say like deeply, deeply extractive, not only from the earth, but from the people there.
Yeah.
Like sourcing those parts for us to like scroll on social media longer
Right.
and around ourselves to like more deeply ignore those kinds of issues in the world and
Yeah.
and the way that we contribute to it, I would say. Like that's really interesting to me. And I also think that for me, like to kind of like answer the question that was posed. But I was also like, listen, if there's needs to be more time for waffling, I'll hold space for that as well. But
Me too.
Thank you.
I did want to kind of speak to that. Like I think that there is a very like smart way to like navigate social media and like the amount of time that we spend on our phone. And I don't think there's any way that I could like talk about it all right now. But I do think there is, just because the timeline of what it looks like, you know, after like humans spend so much time online, we don't know what that looks like, not only to like the waste that we're creating, but regard just like what it does to our minds, what it does to our like nervous systems, what it does to our appetites, our circadian rhythms. These things are kind of like unknowns, but I can also like, I don't know, like there's part of me that's like, I don't think it's not that mysterious either. Like I'm like, I can kind of see how
Totally.
you know what I mean? Like that timeline is not that mysterious to me. And I wonder if yeah, I don't know. I'm just kind of, I guess, kind of curious what comes up for y'all in relation to that.
Yeah, what came up for me was I feel like it reminded me of this dream actually that I had really recently where I think I told Nobu about this. It's like, just fair warning, it's like kind of disturbing, but I feel like it gets to the point, which is that I was like standing on like there was just like I was standing on a cliff and there was like a throng of people, like a huge crowd of people standing on this cliff. And this little boy jumped into the water and he couldn't swim and everybody was like watching him drown and just like waiting for somebody else to like jump in the water and save him. And yeah, that's what it reminds me of, like just like the way that you rolled that out, Hoda, like, you know, it's like I get there's just this way where it's like the personal responsibility is just like seems to kind of just like go missing. It's like it's kind of like, is anybody like, are you going to do something? Like, are you going to do something? You know, like.
I've heard this called like the bystander effect.
Yeah, I was just typing that.
Yeah.
Oh, well, now you don't have to type it.
So much.
You can type it. You can type it. I just saw
No, I
Intrepid
don't.
Body stops typing. Well, I saw you stop typing. But yeah, I think. Well, I'd love to hear what you have to say about bystander effect.
Me?
Or anybody, I guess.
Oh yeah.
I was gonna ask if y'all watched the like Black Mirror episode about it.
Because I have my dreams to.
My dreams are my Black Mirror.
Right. I'm like, I literally don't need the extra imagery. Okay.
Which episode is it? Because I feel like I've seen a. You know, I mean, I'm not. I'd love to hear more about this episode.
Well, yeah, the Black Mirror episode was essentially, gosh, I can't remember it. It was in the first season, but what I fact that I do remember from it was that it was essentially an episode where it was exaggerating and, of course, dramatizing the effects of like bystander effect, and was showing this lens into like a dystopian world where there was an incentive where people were incentivized to take their phones out in public when something was happening to someone and to record it. And so it was like this hyper local view and like step into the well of what the bystander effect could create, which is like this society of people who are incredibly passive, but also incredibly, I'd say, like fed on the drama of seeing another struggle. And so,
Right. Okay, I think I've heard of this. Yeah, go on.
yeah. And so for me, real life, it might not be as dramatic, but I do know that social media feeds can kind of create this affect from my perspective where people feel like they're in the know enough to where when it comes to making decisions where their impact and their presence actually counts, they're too, because they're actually have already spent their not only just like mental energy but emotional, their spiritual, like even their ability to like pray for stuff kind of gets like flattened because they've just spent all day doing what people call like doom scrolling, and so they feel they're a bystander to the world, when in reality I think social media creates a fog around how impactful we actually can be, like how we talk in attending call, how like like change happens locally and like people forget about locality. And I also think that another thing that social media kind of supports us in forgetting. I'm being nice, but
No, totally. That's a great point. How to
It supports us in forgetting.
which I feel like that's come up in the broom before, and like I think it's part of the reason why we have like the different, we have different channels for like different locations in the world where we are.
Totally. I mean, I love how you weave that back because, when you first started talking about the DRC or the Democratic Republic of Congo, I was like, yeah, I mean, it's really good to have this information. It's really good to like find locally applicable ways to use it. I would say like I'm on like an iPhone 12, so it basically means it's powered by horses. But like it still works, except for I guess I keep getting disconnected. I don't think that's because of my iPhone. I think that's because of demonic interference. All right. But like it's useful. It's useful information, and like it's tricky, right? Because like we do have access to a lot of useful information online, but then I think also, yeah, I love that like you kind of brought it back to like bystander effect and like local applicability, right? It's like, well, I think what could happen with that kind of thing, I don't think this is happening to you or like to everybody who's engaging with the information about mining in the Democratic Republic of Congo, but it's like you could just spend a lot of time reading about it when like like you were saying, it's like sometimes we don't know everything about the affect of social media, but we kind of know, right? And it's like, yeah, you don't need to know everything about what's happening in the Democratic Republic of Congo of Congo. This is the Democratic Republic of Congo is the brew. No, I'm just kidding. But like, you don't need to know everything. It's like, how do they use lithium? Like, which exact location in Congo? Like, what are the names of the
right.
people who are in the mines? It's like, like that episode, like Portlandia, where they want to know like what the name of the chicken is before they eat it. It's like, how does Gordon feel about being my
Oh
meal?
my
Like it's not like, no,
god.
you don't need to know all this kind of stuff. You just need to know that you don't need a fucking new phone every year. You probably don't even need a new phone every 2 years when your contract runs out, so that you can like get a new phone and continue to pay like $90 a month in the US, because you could just like use the same phone and then you could pay like $40 a month and then that $50 a month you could give to the Democratic Republic of Congo, maybe, or you could like use it to buy magnesium supplements because most of our like pineal glands are like horribly crystallized or calcified, I should say, by the incursion of fluoride into our water, which is a chemical biowaste product. But I'm just like cramming all the shit in there. But like, but you know, like what I'm kind of saying is like you could spend all your time reading about this shit when you sort of like kind of know what you need to know, right? Um, and then I feel like, you know, maybe less with what's happening with mining in the DRC. I'll say it because it's evidently hard for me to say the full thing. But you know, like you have like people engaging in what they call like online activism, right? It's like, oh, I don't really know what I can do, so I'm gonna spend like an inordinate amount of time like retweeting things or like resharing them or like
Yes.
sharing them to like my family WhatsApp when it's got like nothing to do with people's lives. And it's like all of this time, like you might fool yourself into thinking that you're having some kind of effect. And like maybe sometimes you have this tiny effect, but then it's like now a larger effect is everybody in your family group chat thinks you're crazy.
Exactly.
Everybody in your family group chat is like, we're having an important conversation about what to do about grandma, and you're dropping shit about like evangelical churches. Come on.
Exactly. No, I was just in the chat saying that I had a moment like this with my family recently, and it was like I literally said that to an effect to one of my sisters, where I'm like, "What's the point of you sending this?" And like we're out the details of like so and so's graduation. Like this is not relevant right now, you know?
Right. It's like,
Yeah,
let's get locally applicable.
yeah. Like what's happening right here, right now? Like please.
Totally. It's like your family fabric is rupturing. Like, you know,
Bruh.
I'm not gonna fly to Congo,
Clean up your own
and
yard.
you know, totally. And then yeah, I think that all kind of weaves into like it's subtle, right? But then it's also like not that subtle. It's like, yeah, we can get information online, which is super useful, and we can even share it with people appropriately at the right times. Like I would say, now you sharing what's happening in the DRC feels very appropriate to me. But we also have a lot to do locally, and we also have a lot to do like non-locally in like our families and stuff, right? Like as somebody who spent a long time living far away from my family, I feel like participating in those family chats in a way which was like quote local unquote to like the concerns of my family and my family members was really healing for me. And I'll say it was also more difficult when one of my aunts who I love was just spamming us with like Christian stuff. um but yeah, I guess like what I kind of want to like end what I'm saying is just like I don't want to come across as if like I'm all against like parasocial media or the internet, but I do feel like it's really really tricky to use it in ways which are like restorative for like our bodies and then like our families and our communities. And I feel like this kind of like puts me back in the frame of the dream that Hannah shared, which I'm really grateful for, which is just like, yeah, you know, I think a lot of people are kind of like that little boy, right? And they're just sort of like drowning in all this information. And then people are too busy also drowning in that information to help that little boy or help themselves. Um, and it's like, you know, I'd say like normally when I've heard about bystander effect, it refers to sort of this what I've also heard called like quote diffusion of responsibility unquote, right? So it's like we haven't said that this one person is responsible, so everybody is like maybe somebody else will do it. And I think that's really real, right? Like we have like, you know, a minister of defense, we have a minister of food and agriculture, we have a minister of like health, but I don't think there are like many prominent organizations, governmental or non-governmental, which are trying to like help us with this problem. I think it's mostly like individual actors, people like Jonathan Haidt and the people who work with him. You know, there's a guy called Tristan something who used to work for Google who's trying to create like an organization which deals with this kind of stuff. But now we're talking about individuals who probably have like shoestring budgets, and they're trying to work against like the massive financial incentivization structures of like venture capital, and also in some cases allegedly like sovereign states who are using social media to disarm populations, allegedly. um so like not only is it like a diffusion of responsibility because like most of the people who are in this field are trying to do things which make it harder for people to appropriately navigate information, and most of the people who are trying to help people who are you know, drowning in information don't have much money or much financial incentive. But I think it's also that like a lot of people don't know how to use it, like social media or the internet appropriately, right? So it's like not only do we not know who's supposed to help, but I'd say like most of us probably don't feel like we have the skill and the capacity to help. But please disagree.
No, that totally aligns for me.
And it says, what do we do when those people don't do their jobs? I'm like, which people? Like, for which people is it their job to ensure that internet usage is safe and healthy? Like, I don't even know.
I guess,
Right.
yeah. I mean, that's a good. I guess it would be like the CDC, but then the follow up, what I said after, what do we do when those people don't do their jobs, was like, well, really, it's more like, what do we do when like those institutions are just like not in alignment with our needs and the Earth's needs,
Facts.
you know? Yeah.
I mean, I'll say that like Mercury is in the ninth house. For me, actually, no, I'd say like the moon is in the ninth house for me natally. So like, what I want to say to that is like we align their incentives with the betterment of Earth.
Mm.
What is like divest? Sorry, you said whispers. I don't know if you meant for that to be
Not like quiet,
read out.
Whispers loudly.
gently.
How do you do that, Hoda?
What?
Yeah, you say whispers, but it's mad loud.
No. I was just kind of playing dumb because you were like divest, and I was like,
Oh,
how
yeah.
do
How
you
do we divest?
how do you
Sorry,
divest?
how do you divest? Yeah,
How do
that's a good
you
question.
divest?
How do you divest?
We should definitely like name this episode that, first of all. I would
Noted.
no not give a fuck about the overcultures. I like not catering wisdom to social medias and like using social media more wisely. That, as somebody who's been on social media, I'm saying for like over 15 years. So it's like I've learned the hard way. And I'm not saying that like my shit got leaked. You know, like I'm not saying that like hard way in that way. What I mean is like I have a way of like like staying up late watching Netflix, you know? Like I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
so many other things with my life. I could develop hobbies. I can like go for a walk. I can like help my mom plant a garden. And so like I
Hey,
had to get really real with myself and like yeah, I can't act like I'm never gonna use social media and that I'm like that radical. Like
Yeah.
I still have a very superficial side. I still like certain people like my posts. I'm like, thank you. That's what I thought. And like I'm still like that person, but I'm like, I think strategy is important. And I think I'm gonna like live on this hill forever. Like locality is important because then I think
Yeah.
and then also like creativity is important because then you can use social media or parasocial media as a place to like offer what you're already doing in your like IRL material for in your smaller like online communities. And so then it's kind of like shifts the power dynamic. And instead of like the internet being this void, it can be like a place that, you know, you don't feel obligated to, you know, because I also feel like, yeah, a lot of people are like about micro learning and like using YouTube University and TikTok University. But I'm like, yo, sometimes I like want to give my brain a break. And so like, what about downloading a drawing app and like drawing on there, you know, or like there's cool like apps where you can like play with audio and music and like photo editing. And so it's like I think it's about like strategy and like maybe like divesting in a way that would pour that energy back into like like your 3D material local world. That's what's worked for me, you know. So but how would you all divest, or what would you guys invest instead?
Hey,
That's
I
a
love
great
that reframe.
question. Thank you.
I feel like I said like a little bit too loud. You know, like when sometimes like you go to a restaurant and you like the food and you're like, and like everybody's turned around in the restaurant. They're like, what the fuck is
Yeah.
It's not as loud as it wasn't as loud as my cackle when you said demonic interference. So go on.
I mean, I would love to hold space for y'all to like either text or, you know, unmute and talk about how y'all investing wisely when
Yeah.
it comes to like your attention and the internet.
Yeah.
And
And
maybe divesting too.
I'm even thinking about like people who are listening that are not in the room, if you're still listening at the end of this episode. Like,
Right. Yeah, I'd love to hear from people outside the broom or people who are listening asynchronously as well.
join the
I
broom
mean,
and tell us.
join the broom and tell us on social media, and we'll probably bring it into the broom and talk about you behind your back. I'm just saying, but
That's one marketing technique.
Yeah.
yeah, we're talking about you in the broom. I feel like that might work because I feel like people be like, "Oh, you're talking about me. That sounds juicy, right?" Like,
We're that.
no. I mean, I'll say that like Nobu 2, who's like Wario to like Mario, right? What Nobu 2 was like, aren't you guys spending a lot of time online? Like sometimes I've been like critical of social media addiction and people like look at how many posts I have on Twitter, like over 15 years, but they'll be like, bro, like you have like 15,000 posts, like you're addicted. And I'm like, bro, like I drink water. It doesn't mean I'm fucking addicted to water. Like next, right? But then I do spend time online. I feel like it's to be like compassionate. I think it's very hard not to
Yeah, I was gonna
because
say it's
very
inevitable.
good. It's very good information online. Very good information online. And also there are some very good people online. I don't know why I'm imitating somebody like that, but I'm Asian, okay? But there are very good people online, and there's very good information online, and I'd say like there's very good people who I would say are struggling online, and I do feel like I do good work with those people. And I think that's one way I invest my time online is like, connecting to people who want to like refine themselves spiritually or emotionally or physically as well. I do like movement classes and they can be quite strenuous. My quads they're not like Hanuman level, but my quads are like pretty good. But I'll also say that like recently I've been using online tools to speak to people who live in the same city that I live in and I've been finding out about like the improvisational dance community here.
Yeah.
Shout out to Contact Improvisation Perth in North Korea.
Hey.
I've been finding out about the improvisational music community here, and there is like an experimental music festival coming up this weekend, which not only did I find out about online, but I also plan to go to it and meet more people offline.
That's awesome.
And I've also been using online tools selectively to share it with people that I feel like might be interested and are able to attend offline. And that's my answer to your lovely question. Thank you.
I
Wow.
love that.
That is lovely. I think.
I hope you have fun at the experimental music festival. That sounds so cool.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it because I think
Yeah.
that like one of the talks they had in like an introductory series called Night Series was about the softwareization of culture. So I feel like there's probably
Whoa.
some people there who feel like they can invest and divest online more effectively.
Yeah. That's such a juicy title to me.
Pretty dope. I didn't get to go to it, but yeah.
It's still like, yeah.
I was too busy online. Sorry, I'm not.
Wild though, because it's like I feel like I've built really strong communities online as well, and so it's like
Yeah.
I think that that's why the reframe had to be invest because like
Yeah.
I think that that's when it can be fun. I think I've also shared with you all how like I've had long distance friendships and like long distance relationships and like that I like harken back to is that felt sense of like having a whole day out and like enjoying myself on my phone and then coming home and like updating some of my
Mhm.
people on the kind of day I've had. And like that's kind of like what it feels like sometimes too. Like I mean
Yeah.
not on the timeline, you know, because I'm like, y'all not getting this shit for free. But the homies, it does, yeah. Like I'll invest that energy and that like awareness and like mindful. So yeah, I
Totally.
think best is the perfect way to also like, yeah, just like transmute and like alchemize that energy. I don't think we all have to like be offline and go get brick Nokia phones unless you want to. Those
You want
people.
to play Snake?
Yeah, like so dope.
I don't want to be interrupted by notifications on my iPhone while I'm playing Snake, alright?
I'm just like remembering the days when I had a flip phone and like I panicked. Like, you know how you could like there was like internet, but you like couldn't use it? Like it
Yes.
was like you like could potentially sign on to like AIM, but like you couldn't really, like it was gonna like cost your parents money.
Yeah.
Yeah, like every message is gonna cost you like $5.
Yeah. Um, I feel like something that I feel like I'm always kind of trying to be mindful of is just like spending time outside.
Mm.
Um, and just like doing like yard work and like, just like those, like sitting with my niece on the ground for like an hour, you know?
Mm. That sounds like divesting from the internet. Is that
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah, and like investing in locality. I feel like I've been
Mm.
investing in locality recently and yeah, reinvesting. Like I've been spending more time with my brother who just like moved home.
Hey.
Um and I've been like spending time with my niece. Yeah, spending time with the people who are around me.
Yeah, what came up for me when you said that was just like nourishing your roots.
Mhm. Yeah.
That feels so
Hmm. I mean, low key, I've also been feeling like a lot of people, especially like people who I would say like spiritually aligned from my perspective, just like, moving closer to home and spending more time with like their living ancestors, let's call it.
Absolutely. Yes. I was just having a
Oh,
conversation about this earlier. Mm-hmm.
but yeah, I guess I was gonna ask Hoda, like, I won't just turn your question back on you because I feel like you answered it to my satisfaction mostly. But I guess I'm kind of curious if like it would work for you to say that like wise investment of attention results in like a profit, first of all, because that's like, most people we think about investment understand that you're investing to like either support a cause and or to like make a profit on your investment, right? And then if that feels fair, would you say it's fair to say that like a profit might be represented by like enjoying your time online and offline more?
Absolutely. Like as a result of like that reshuffling of one's awareness between like online and like
Mhm.
things. Yeah, I think that that would be the like gain and like the thing that you would quote, look forward to is some sort of ripening of like where that awareness goes, and then also like simply put, like balancing, I think is something that
Mm-hmm.
where I'm like, okay, I know what I'm going online to do. I know when I break out my laptop, like what I'm doing. Type
Mm.
out of pod,
Intention, would you say?
yes, intention and direction and like
You
focus.
mean like not doom scrolling?
Absolutely not doom scrolling. I absolutely
I'm not gonna stop doom scrolling anytime soon. I'm gonna be honest with y'all.
no, real. No, and that's real. That's so real because I like there's value to it because like doom scrolling taught me to like transmute. Doom scrolling taught me to
Mhm.
be alchemist, like real shit of my mind.
Interesting.
Mhm.
But I'm also like now I've learned that I'm like I'm good. Like even with when it comes to like scrolling on TikTok and stuff, sincerely, if it's not like recipes, if it's not someone showing like a hairstyle that I can like direct, if it's not something online that I cannot directly apply to my life within the next 3 days, I'm not I'm not looking at it, I'm not listening to it, I'm not reading it. And if it's not like something I can come back to also in the next 3 days, I'm not going to engage with it because I think at the basis of all of it, it is about joy. And it's about
Yes.
good when I'm online, but I want to feel good when I'm offline too. Like I don't want to feel a craving in any one particular direction. I want to
Yeah.
like on the spectrum of expression in a way that feels good to me and I'm not necessarily beholden to any one facet of like expressing myself. Like people talk about
Mhm.
self-love all day, for example, and then they'll tweet about self-love. But then I'm like, sometimes for me, showing myself self-love is like just buying the little soda that I like, or just like laying in my bed when I would usually like rush out. And so like not going online and giving myself time to do that is like the profit. It's like the gain. And then
Mm.
practice that long enough, I think, has that gain as well.
Mm.
Um,
Can I share a little bit of self-love, which I feel like is like quite relevant, but may not be relevant? Is like I was just talking to my mom about how much I've been enjoying the luxury of like not sharing online or even
Mm.
like sharing online with like my family members, right? Which is a little bit interesting, but it's like sometimes I know that something I share with my family members will probably just be rejected. So like, yeah,
Mm.
like I know it's true to me. I'm just gonna keep it to myself, and that feels like a lot of self-love.
Yeah, like not needing to share it.
Which I think is very much like not within the incentive structure of, say, Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk.
Definitely not.
Maybe you could call it a divestment.
yeah,
I'm thinking about something that Hoda said in field tuning this week, which was just about like, yeah, sometimes like the most potent work that we do is the work that nobody sees.
Oh,
And
that
yeah, I
part.
just that fucking hit because I remember having that realization like last year, and I was just like, wow, yeah.
That part.
That part.
I'm just kind of tuning into the container and holding space.
Me too.
I will say that this conversation is incredibly full.
Yeah.
Curious how it was for y'all, or if there's anything else coming up for y'all.
Me too. I guess what's kind of coming up for me is like the continuity of the conversation and how like we kind of started off. First of all, we kind of started off introducing ourselves, which I think is nice. But then I feel like very early on in the conversation, I asked the question of like, what is value to you? And I feel like we went on a journey which was very continuous. Like there was some like little side cracks and stuff, which I think is nice. But you know, in the end, we came back to this somewhat miraculously. I'll say, in my opinion, we came back to this like topic of value and like investment and divestment and like you know profit or you know creating more value from the value that we bring just by being awareness of having awareness. Um,
Love it.
and I feel complete.
Me too.
As do I.
Feel like I
Shame
do
that
after I
you
have a
feel
good meal.
Eh?
Does anybody want to do like the introducing or the concluding, or it's like is now the time
All
for
right.
Lexi to?
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. If you would like to join the Broom Discord server, you can find the link in the show notes.
I feel like the show notes, maybe for the first time, will have like a link to buymeacoffee.com/broom
Yes.
radio.
Yes, that's what I was going to get to next. That if you would like to support our work with your money, then you can buy us a coffee, which is new and exciting. And needless to say, we'd be incredibly grateful to receive your support.
Yeah.
For
I'll
sure.
also say that if you sign up at buymeacoffee.com/the broom radio/membership, then you will also get email updates in case like the Broom Discord's hard to follow for some of y'all, or in case like the internet's hard to follow for some of y'all. Then we will be posting episodes, and I'll say like in some time frame we will be posting like longer form content and summaries of the episodes and also the conversations that we are cultivating in the Broom. But you can also just make a one-off donation at buymeacoffee.com as of like now, I'd say.
As of right now.
Can I also say that like I haven't like talked to y'all too much about this, but I've been kind of meditating on like how like the contributions that people make at buymeacoffee.com/the broom radio or buymeacoffee.com/the broom radio/membership could sort of like become part of like what we've kind of talked about as like the Broom Fund, which is like you know I would say like a war chest that we've been talking about forming, so that maybe like one day we can support causes related to, let's say, safe usage of social media. But I would also say that like the intention that I've heard us put into words many times is around like collectively, like y'all probably know we collectively govern the Broom, which is to say that like anybody can nominate themselves to be one of the tenders of the Broom, and then we have a explicit process for like dealing with nominations. I would say like all of the changes that we make structurally to the Broom get made via votes and or by executive action, which ends up being documented So there's like a paper trail for all the decisions that go into the governance of the broom. And I think like we're starting to put together the pieces of a process for like collectively deciding how we spend the money that comes into the broom. So that I'd say like the money that people are putting into the broom and the time and the energy that we've all been putting into the broom can be directed in a way which is for the good of like all of us as individuals and as like a community. So yeah, I'm sure like we'll be talking more about that in the coming weeks. I'll also give a plug for like the open tending call, which is going to be happening, I think, on Tuesday night next week, where for the first time we'll be talking about, like statistics and metrics which relate to the work that we're doing and having a discussion of like whether we're measuring the right things, whether we're aspiring to do the right things. And then also, for the first time, we'll be having like a so-called quote retro unquote, where we get to talk about like how we can improve the way we do things in the broom too. So if you'd like to be a part of that, I know I want to be, then I'd love to see y'all there. So once again, look for links to join the broom in the show notes. Taste the experience of collective governance, and if it feels aligned, then please visit buymeacoffee.com/the broom radio. And thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Peace, everyone.